Hello there guys, and welcome to every episode of The Simpsons Season 34 Reviewed. This season was only completed just over a week ago, but thankfully I was on top of things and I already watched most of the episodes in advance, so I'm ready to go. This will be the last video in this series for a year or so let's hope it's a good one. Season 33 was a decent season with some good character stuff. All I'm asking for is for this season to have the same, and maybe even be a bit funnier. I hope that's not asking too much. Either way, I want to say a massive thank you to all of you who are still watching this series, and now that we're all caught up, I want you to share your thoughts on the series as a whole. I will reveal mine when I do the series roundup video, which will be coming out in a few weeks. As ever, if you are enjoying the content, please help me out by giving a like and subscribe. I really like the small viewer base we've got so far, but if we can add to that a little bit and get more like-minded people here, that would be great. Anyway, let's move into Season 34, shall we? Season 34, Episode 1, Habeas Tortoise. After Homer humiliates himself in a town meeting, he finds acceptance from an internet conspiracy group. My trivia for this one is that Homer discusses the 2011 movie Zookeeper. And my best moment was Marge massaging Homer's head. The season opener gets a 3 out of 5. It started in a simple way. Homer is humiliated after apparently not knowing what a library is, so he quickly falls down the rabbit hole of conspiracy theories. Sure, it's a bit odd that Homer cares that much that the town thinks he's dumb, but it was an excuse to get into the main plot more quickly, so I guess it's okay. It was nice seeing Homer actually find solace in his conspiracy group, and it was nice to see Marge looking out for him the whole time, making sure that he never got himself into any real trouble. As far as the satire on conspiracy theorists goes, it was rather tame, to be honest. It made the obvious references about flat earthers and 5G and all that, but for the most part they were portrayed as people who just want to fit in and come up with some wild theories and puzzles to solve. I'm not criticizing that, by the way, as I think conspiracy theorists get enough of a hard time already. I guess I should elaborate on that by giving my take on them. I wouldn't call myself a conspiracy theorist, as some people do take it to extremes and believe in nonsense that is clearly not true, and may even be potentially harmful in some cases, so I don't really want to be lumped in with those people. In fairness, I don't like being lumped in with any group of people, even if I agree with their cause. At the same time though, conspiracies do happen. The word doesn't exist to describe something that's not real after all. And the thing is, most people are happy to accept it at low levels of society, whether it be business extortion, or low-level crime for example, drug dealing, etc. People are quite happy to admit that shady stuff goes down there all the time. But when it comes to governments and people in big positions of power, most people go, it can't be happening at that level, surely. But why not? If anything, given how corrupt politicians and business people can be, is it not more likely to be happening at that level, when these people have more power to be able to get away with it? Don't you think? That's why from my vantage point, citizen journalism is absolutely essential. Even if 90% of it is crap, there will be bits in there which turn out to be true. Now, if the mainstream media actually did their job, then maybe we would have no need for it, and conspiracy theorists would just drift away. But alas, the mainstream media only ever goes so far in search of the truth. That's my take on it anyway. Please leave yours in the comments. I always find this stuff interesting to discuss. Overall, this was an okay start to the season. The weird animation of Marge massaging Homer's head was probably the most memorable part of it. Season 34, Episode 2, One Angry Lisa. Lisa gets called for jury duty, while Marge becomes obsessed with her new exercise bike. My trivia for this one is that Homer and Marge end the episode riding Lisa's bike, singing the song Just the Two of Us. And my best moment was the green screen gag. I gave this one a 1 out of 5. I just didn't vibe with this one at all. I think the Lisa jury plot was meant to be the main one, but it was hard to tell, because the time was divided equally between the two. It is kind of fitting though, because they were both equally pointless. Lisa just happens to get called up for duty and that's it. She gets into some tedious arguments with the judge, just to pad out the episode. Hardly any jokes are attempted, and literally no satire is attempted, which is odd for a story of this nature. Marge getting addicted to this bike and the fitness instructor was also a waste. It just ended up amounting to another marriage crisis, which I couldn't even be bothered to pay attention to, although I did pay attention enough to notice the silly scene of Marge rushing over on a bike to save Homer. I mean, seriously, how long does that guy take to strangle someone, for Christ's sake? You know what, I'm just gonna cut this review short before I carry on ranting. Season 34, Episode 3, Lisa the Boy Scout. Some hackers hack the show and start showing damaging unaired episode clips. So my trivia for this one is that this episode was originally called Love Actually, which I think is a better title, to be honest. And my best moment was the dog scene of Homer and Santa's Little Helper, as you can see there. I gave this one a 4 out of 5. This is one of the more unique episodes of the show, for sure. It was risky to try and do a story like this, but I think it worked mainly because it was self-aware and didn't take things too seriously. They referenced a lot of things about the show, like all the ridiculous predictions it has made, and the perception of it by the fanbase. It even takes the piss out of itself by showing some of the more infamous moments of the show. The ending line from Homer about him and Marge having another meaningless marriage squabble off screen was also on point. In terms of the clips themselves, they were good enough. A lot of them were interesting, like Martin being a 36-year-old man, or Lenny being in Carl's imagination all along. Now, they weren't exactly 22 short films level in terms of comedy, but I did laugh at Homer's surprised reaction, not to Santa's Little Helper talking, but to finding out that it's morning. So yeah, overall this was a bit of fun. The show dished out some jabs at itself, some jabs at us, the fans, and had me engaged most of the way. Put it this way, I'm definitely glad we got this, instead of a story about Bart and Lisa in the Scouts. Season 34, Episode 4, The King of Nice. Marge is hired as a segment producer on Krusty's new daytime talk show, but her initial excitement fades when she discovers what a nightmare the job is. My trivia for this one is that Viacom is a parody of Viacom, and my best moment was the NFT joke. This one gets a 2 out of 5 from me. Well, last episode may have been innovative, but this was about as by the numbers as it gets. Krusty getting another makeover as a TV star did not interest me, and Marge working for him felt like one of those jobs she just gets to make herself feel like she's out there doing something. The whole thing was also used as a vehicle for some satire about the whole Ellen show debacle. Now sure, call Ellen out if you want, but it's hardly anything too interesting. Everyone and their mother had already done it by this point anyway, and to be honest, I don't care about Ellen either. I mean, is anyone really surprised that her show was a toxic mess? I bet most Hollywood shows are the same. The main problem here is that there was nothing to get excited about. The jokes were just as tired as the plot. The NFT play on words thing was decent, but yeah, overall this episode was not. Season 34, Episode 5, Not It. Homer and his teenage friends are pursued by a killer clown. My information about this one is that Moe sings Rock You Like a Hurricane by the Scorpions, and my best moment was just the battles with the clown. This one gets a 4 out of 5. Even though this was not technically a Treehouse of Horror episode, it won't go down as one in the record books. It was essentially set up as one big Treehouse of Horror segment, in that it was all non-canon and completely unrealistic. I think it worked very well overall. Making Krusty Pennywise from Stephen King's It was a great choice. Krusty often behaves like a villain, so it was great to see him being able to fully lean into that role. The animation helped with that too, as they played around with it and tried to make him look as menacing as possible. The basic story of Marge, Homer, comic book guy, Moe and Carl as kids also held my interest. The love triangle thing added another layer to proceedings, and it was paid off in the end, where comic book guy sacrificed himself to save Marge, to make it up to her for lying about writing the poem. As I said, the battles with the clown were always entertaining and are my favourite scenes, just because they add some much needed action to back up all the talking. This also managed to be reasonably funny, given the horror style of story. I liked Homer working at Doe's Tavern, and Bart and Lisa having their roles swapped was cool to see. The visual gag of a sign asking why people are still moving in was also decent. Season 34, Episode 6. Treehouse of Horror 33. The 3 short stories this year are Le Pookadook, Death Tome, and Simpsons world. So this was the first time that an entire segment was animated in anime style. It took a while, but it was nice to finally see. And my best moment for this one was the montage of deaths that Lisa writes in the book. This year's Treehouse of Horror gets a 5 out of 5. I was impressed by this one. I thought maybe after we had a good Halloween themed episode last time, this would disappoint, but this episode was having none of it. In a way, this harkens back to Treehouse of Horrors of old, where every segment brought something different to the table. Part 1 relied solely on the battle between Maggie and the possessed Marge, and it worked incredibly well. Marge has always been Maggie's protector on a show, so seeing her advancing on Maggie with a knife is kind of unsettling. In a good way, of course. They really knew how to use the existing relationship between those two to increase the horror element. Part 2 was a great parody of the manga and anime Death Note. It was very well animated and made enough sense as a standalone story that it would still be enjoyable to people who have no knowledge of the source material. Lisa fits the role of the main character well, and watching her struggle with her own morals at the situation was another unique perspective. The creative deaths she came up with were also quite entertaining, and the final twist, that L was Bart, was well executed. The final segment was pure fan service, but damn was it satisfying as a Simpsons nerd. Just seeing all the classic moments over the years shown again, in a way which the family have to interact with and deal with, was very cool. And the meta ending of there being a Simpsons world, a South Park world, a Bob's Burgers world, etc. was a clever way to end. All in all, this Treehouse of Horror had creepy moments, funny moments, and even some fan service for hardcore fans. What more could I ask for from a Halloween special? Season 34, Episode 7, From Beer to Paternity. Duffman goes on a road trip with Homer and Lisa to try and find his estranged daughter. However, the trip threatens to expose Homer's own terrible parenting. So this episode title is a reference to the 1953 movie From Here to Eternity. And my best moment was seeing the different versions of Duffman through the decades. I gave this one a 3 out of 5. This was an average at best episode. I like some of the early groundwork they did about Duffman's past, showing us how his image changed over time, and the whole election campaign had the potential to be fun, I thought, but that whole plot about running for mayor was swept to the side once it was revealed that he has a daughter. It soon turned into a road trip, where Homer and Lisa developed problems of their own. It wasn't that bad, but the Homer-Lisa conflict never really felt that meaningful. They have worked out far worse issues than this in the past, so this felt like a drop in the ocean in comparison. Also, the ending of Duffman making up with his daughter was a bit underwhelming. It was clearly the direction the episode was heading, but when Duffman kind of stumbles into doing the right thing, it doesn't leave you feeling very satisfied with the whole situation. If they were going to do the happy ending, then they may as well have committed to it by having Duffman actually change as a person and a father. A side character that actually changes and has some character growth. What a weird suggestion, I know, right? As much as I was disappointed with the second half of the episode, there was still a few good moments here to make me accept this episode overall. I already mentioned the old Duffman adverts, but I also liked the visual gag of the misleading signs. Season 34, Episode 8, Stepbrother from the Same Planet. Homer is stunned and resentful when he sees Abe being a great stepfather to his new girlfriend's quirky young son. Meanwhile, Lisa and Bart throw the ultimate slumber party, so if you're paying attention during the episode, a hat of Pikachu from Pokemon can be seen in one of the scenes, and my best moment was Lisa bribing Chief Wiggum with Snickers. I gave this one a 4 out of 5. I liked this episode mainly because it managed to take an overused premise in Homer and Abe's relationship and found a way to look at it in a new way. They did this by adding a kid into the mix. Homer seeing how nice Abe can be to someone else's child, of course is going to annoy him, especially given how Calvin is so different to what he considers cool, and therefore what he thinks Abe should like. In general, I liked Calvin as a character. He brought a strong personality, and some of his moments with Homer were funny, like their petty argument in the car, making faces at one another. It could be argued that he was a bit too mature for his age, but then again, I guess some 11-year-olds really are like that. They also cleverly gave the other side of kids in the subplot anyway, which helped to balance that out. Of course, with Bart and Lisa throwing this fun party. I like that plot too, mainly because it was Lisa who suggested it, and the final line about giving Wiggum Snickers if he pretended to arrest her was great. Back to the main plot now though. I also enjoyed how it ended. It was nice to see Calvin help Homer find a way to connect with his dad, and even if it was a bit predictable, it was a feel-good moment. Even if, of course, no lessons were learned, as shown by the credits scene. So yeah, this episode had a few funny moments with solid characterizations. Even if the ending won't have any lasting effects, at least the journey the episode took us on was worth it. Season 34, Episode 9, When Nelson Met Lisa. We see a future tale of the will they, won't they relationship of Lisa and Nelson. So the title, and indeed large parts of this episode, are based on the 1989 film When Harry Met Sally. And my best moment was Homer's narration. This one is a 1 out of 5. This episode did absolutely nothing for me, probably up there competing for the title of the worst future episode of all time. Now we all know by this point that most future episodes aren't to be taken too seriously, but what was I just saying in the last episode review? As long as the journey within is fun and has a good story to tell, it doesn't matter. This didn't have any of that though. The Lisa and Nelson ship is one that I've always been indifferent to. I mean, it makes some sense I guess, but I have never fully brought those two right together. Same with Lisa and Milhouse. I mean, why does it have to be one or the other? I don't think she fits with either of them, to be honest. This episode did nothing to change that view, because it was basically a worse rehash of Lisa's date with Density. We got the same reasons why Lisa was attracted to him, and some scenes about them never fully connecting, before the episode tried to have a genuine moment between the two at the end. It just never came together, and it all wound up feeling so unconvincing. I mean, Lisa flip-flopped between Nelson and this other guy all episode, on what felt like a whim, literally just based on which one of them did something for her at any particular moment. It makes her look a bit stupid, to be honest, and when Lisa is looking dumb, it's clear that the characterization has gone awry. That wasn't even the worst of it though. This was also just a bore fest. Most of the time was spent on Lisa and Nelson just talking, and the few jokes that were tried were lame, and never made use of the future setting well at all. I mean, an invisibility cloak, really? What is this, Harry Potter? The only somewhat amusing bit was Homer's ridiculously bad narration, but that by no means saves this episode. Season 34, Episode 10, Game Done Changed. When Bart discovers a profitable glitch in an online game, he ropes Principal Skinner into his lucrative criminal enterprise. My trivia for this one is that sound effects from Super Mario Bros. And Donkey Kong are heard in a video game throughout the episode. And my best moment was Ned finding Homer, Lisa and Marge hooked on the game. I gave this one a 3 out of 5. This was definitely mixed for me. It felt a bit late to be trying to satirize gaming, and some of the shady monetization and microtransactions that go on in some of them. That being said, I did like how they tried something different by animating all the characters playing the game. It did throw up some nice moments. It was just kinda sweet to see Marge and Maggie talking to each other in some way, even if it was through emojis on the game. I also like the scene when Ned goes inside the Simpson house, only to find them all staring like zombies at the screens. It was slickly animated, and probably gives a subtle message about what too much screen time can do. As far as the main Bart and Skinner story, it was nice to see more time spent at the school, as that area is often lacking lately. I also liked Skinner being bolder and taking the initiative. I think he always works best as a character when he has some backbone, so it was nice to see him get carried away and going too far in a scheme for even Bart. The ending to this felt a tad weak though. I mean, nothing went horribly wrong, it's just that we have seen Bart learning to respect Skinner before, and I kind of lost interest in the battle with the other school. Overall, it's had its good moments, but it also had a few weak ones, and it didn't stick the landing quite as well as I'd have liked. Season 34, Episode 11, Top Goon. After Coach Mo recruits Nelson as a brawler for his hockey team, they develop a bond. And the title of this episode is a reference to the movie Top Gun. My best moment was the ending. I gave this one a 3 out of 5. I think this episode should have been better than it was because the core story was good. Mo and Nelson, perhaps unsurprisingly, have a good rapport. I think Mo views Nelson as a younger version of himself, someone rough around the edges, but who is suffering deep down and needs some help. So because of all this, it was nice to see him stick by him throughout the episode. And the ending where he gave him King Toot's trophy was a nice one. Some of the hockey games were also fun, and Nelson acting like a human shield running through people reminded me of the football episode Bart's Star. Despite having all the ingredients for a good episode though, this kept kind of tripping over the small things. There are just too many scenes which don't need to be here. The Fat Tony scenes, for instance, come in all too late and only act as a set piece for Mo to get Nelson back. I think there were far better ways to do that. Also, in a rare turn of events, Homer was the weak point of the episode. He was annoying here, and he kept complaining about having to take his kids places. He was a jerk, very reminiscent of the way he was during some of the teen seasons. If you're going to have him act this way, at least try and make it funny. Him constantly complaining about having to do things for his kids is not funny. So yeah, overall this was okay, but could and frankly should have been better. Season 34, Episode 12, My Life as a Vlog. Through a series of YouTube videos, we see the rise and fall of the Simpsons family vlog. My trivia for this one is that this is the first ever episode of the show, which first aired on New Year's Day. And my best moment was all the different podcasts from the townspeople. This episode gets a rating of a 3 out of 5. This was okay, but I think it took the concept a bit too far in all honesty. I usually support the show trying new things, but we have got a lot of this type of plot lately. Lisa the Boy Scout was only a few episodes ago after all. Now of course I'm fine with the show trying to get with the times and comment on modern technology and social media, but I think this one threw too much of that in our face. The big conflict of the episode, of internet fame turning the Simpson family into jerks, was fairly predictable and nothing new. The same kind of thing actually happened all the way back in season 11, with the episode Behind the Laughter, only substitute YouTube for TV. Don't get me wrong, this episode wasn't all bad. There were quite a few fun moments. Homer spending some time with Maggie was nice, and a lot of the montages of the Springfieldians giving their hot takes on the situation were good. I like how pretty much everyone has a wannabe podcast. I suppose the subtle message of spending too much time getting hooked on this stuff is correct also. So again, this was an okay episode that could conceivably have been better. Season 34, Episode 13, The Many Saints of Springfield. When Ned Flanders falls on hard times, Fat Tony makes him an offer he can't refuse. But when Flanders realizes he accidentally partnered with the mob, he wants the relationship over. My trivia for this one is that Ned asks Fat Tony if he's a good fella, a reference to the movie Goodfellas, and my best moment was the couch gag. I gave this one a 2 out of 5. For the most part, this season has tried to be its own thing and not reuse plot points, just with different characters. This one, however, despite them literally blowing up Ned's house, did end up falling into that boring trap. We have seen quite a lot of characters get involved with Fat Tony at this point, and although Ned seems like a good character foil for him, they never made the most of that potential here. They didn't have enough interactions together, and the ones they did have were told from Ned's perspective through flashbacks. The ending was also very predictable, with Tony having a brief change of heart, only to go back to his old ways. And the mob, of course, end up getting arrested for the 100th time. I never found this episode particularly funny either, which increases the very underwhelming feeling. I at least liked the creative couch gag though. It obviously had good animation, but I also liked how they gave it a little story, with Homer interacting with all the lost things which fell down the couch over the years. Season 34, Episode 14, Carlson rides again. When Carl is smitten by a woman, he looks into the roots of his identity by discovering the origins of a mysterious rodeo buckle. So the title of this episode, I think, is a reference to the 1948 Looney Tunes cartoon, Bugs Bunny Rides Again, and my best moment was finding out the story of Carl's belt buckle. This one is simply a 3 out of 5. It is interesting we have another episode focused on Carl's backstory, and while this was okay, I don't think it's as good as the saga of Carl from season 24. mainly because that episode also had a travel vibe to it, and was simply more entertaining. This was solid too though. I like how they set up the belt buckle early on, and had it come back into prominence for the ending. It was cool to find out about Carl's biological parents, and the show had a good take on the whole ancestry type show. They got the vibe of what they are like down very well. The way they use an item or a memory to trace a person's family tree, the bit of Carl having to go bull riding to prove he was a real cowboy was okay, mainly because he said he had to prove it to himself, not anyone else. Admittedly, I didn't care that much about Carl with his new woman, mainly because I know that it will probably only be a one-time thing anyway. Despite this episode probably not having any long-term impact, it was a decent way to add more to Carl, and try to get into his head about his real opinions on his heritage. I do wonder though, when are we getting the Lenny Spotlight episode? Season 34, Episode 15, Bartless. After Bart's latest prank leads to chaos at Springfield Elementary, Marge and Homer dream of a world in which Bart is not their son. My trivia for this one is that the Itchy and Scratchy Show episode, The Great British Sleighing Show, is a parody of The Great British Bake Off, which is a cooking show in this country. And instead of a moment, my favourite thing here was just the whole presentation of the episode. This one gets a 4 out of 5. So I have said in recent times that Bart often gets the short end of the stick on the show. So it was good to have an episode basically devoted to showing what he brings to the table. Having Homer and Marge dreaming about a life without him was a different and clever way to do it too. Of course, after Bart's pranks keep annoying them, their initial vision of a life without Bart is idealistic, but they soon learn that his disruptive and creative behavior is needed, not only because it brings some much needed fun into their life, but also because it provides a different perspective and brings out different parts in their personality. This is shown by Bart's scenes with both Homer and Lisa, making Lisa laugh and helping Homer find a new creative way of doing his job. That was all great stuff. Basically, even if his behavior can sometimes have a downside, at the end of the day, everyone could benefit from having a personality like Bart in their lives. Also, I got something extra out of this episode. As someone who has two brothers, I am very familiar with this type of thing. The pranks, the play fighting, all that kind of stuff. I think it's just a part of feisty and boisterous boys being boys. On paper I can see why it would be seen as a negative, but it's the kind of energy that is needed in society as a whole. In moderation for sure, but even for adults I think this type of thing is needed to some extent. And the reason I'm trying to bring attention to it is that I do think there's a bit of an attack on this in society at the minute. I don't mean to get political here at all. That's definitely not my intention. But this type of mindset, this type of behavior, in boys and young men, is often described with terms like toxic masculinity nowadays, and I think that's such a shame. The day this rebellious mindset leaves humanity, the world will be in a bit of trouble. That's the way I see it, and above all else, that's what I got out of this episode. It's probably not even what the writers intended, but that is what TV shows are for, right? For us to interpret the stories based on our own real-life experiences. So to finish off, I want to credit the episode for not only doing Bart a solid, but also getting me to think a bit deeper. I actually thought about giving this a 5, but the comedy was not quite there for that rating to be achieved. Season 34, Episode 16, Hostile Kirk Place. Kirk Van Houten takes exception to a school history lesson that paints one of his ancestors in a bad light. So he goes on a crusade to censor and control the school curriculum. My trivia for this one is that the Price is Right loser sound effect is made when Homer sprays a can of spray music. And my best moment was Lisa Goes Gaga being referenced as one of Springfield's disasters. This one gets a 2 out of 5. As far as this one goes, not my cup of tea. I'm not sure about Kirk being cast as the antagonist again. He seems to always have that role in recent seasons, and I'm not entirely sure it suits his character. And the character stuff in general here was very shallow. None of them ever changed their opinions at all, or their mindset, even with the ending of the gazebo falling down again. Instead, the plot was used as a vehicle for some political satire. I found that to be very underwhelming too. It was essentially about critical race theory, and whether that type of thing should be taught in schools. The episode argues that history should be taught in full, and that trying to suppress it by banning books and such is a bad thing. And of course, as someone who hates censorship, I agree with that. We should not sugarcoat things that happened in the past, any more than the things which still happen today. At the same time though, there is a difference between acknowledging the past and obsessing over it and feeling guilty about it. And I think that's where most of the criticism of critical race theory comes from. So when the episode frames it as Kirk's side, the fascists, versus the woke mob on the other side, it's just an oversimplification of the whole argument and comes across as very messy and lacking nuance. At least there were a few okay moments to stop this from being a 1. The Weird Al Yankovic intro was decent, and I like how even the townspeople now seem to view the Lady Gaga stuff as a disaster. Season 34, Episode 17, Pin Gal. Marge is forced into a tough situation when Homer hires Jacques to coach her for a bowling tournament. So the song Hell's Bells by AC/DC plays when Marge is bowling, and my best moment was the Bronto Burgers joke. I gave this one a 3 out of 5. This was a solid episode. Jacques is an iconic character, so it is good to see him get another turn in the spotlight, 33 years after his last. I also appreciate how this never turned into some marriage crisis, where Homer and Marge were at each other's throats. In fact, Homer was oblivious to Jacques most of the time, and Marge was actively making sure to stay loyal to Homer the whole time. Her winning the bowling match against Jacques to keep the Bowlerama open was predictable, but at least it was a nice moment. Marge actually being able to do Homer a favour like this was a nice change. Despite it being solid though, there was nothing that stands out as amazing here. I never found it that funny, and no doubt you could notice a massive change in both Marge and Jacques' voice from that season 1 episode. The Flintstones reference, with Homer wanting Bronto Burgers, I liked though, especially given how I've just finished watching a lot of that show for my most recent video. Season 34, Episode 18, Fan-ily Feud. After Homer publicly disparages a pop singer, he faces the ire of her fanbase, but he soon finds a way to even the odds. My trivia for this one is that this episode title is a reference to the American game show Fan-ily Feud, and my best moment here was Homer's music video. I gave this one a 4 out of 5. I definitely enjoyed this one overall. The episode really delved into how obsessive fan bases can get over their favourite singer or entertainer. Of course, it's fine to admire someone's work and be a fan of them, and if you can use that for some personal inspiration, then great. But in general, I don't think it's healthy to put anyone up on a pedestal, especially if it's just your favourite musician or sports star who you've never met. They also managed to blend this in well with the family. It was fun seeing Homer get some help from Ashley's rival to fight back against the group, which Lisa and Bart got involved with. He was fully in character the whole time, as was Bart, with him caring about nothing but pranks. Even Marge could be forgiven for being oblivious to it. I think Lisa's characterization is a bit more questionable. Her being such a stan for this pop star felt a little off for what she should be. I don't hate it, as it did serve the plot, but I wasn't infused with it. The ending was very good though. I liked both the music videos, especially Homer's one, where he basically forgives his family and puts an end to the fighting. Homer actually being mature enough to not hold it against them, given that he himself has made many mistakes in the past, was a sweet moment, and as I said, a rare moment of maturity for him. There were a few good jokes here to make this a solid 4, like Homer's portrayal in Ashley's diss track for example, as well as Bart quoting Nelson's "ha ha" at Lisa. Season 34, Episode 19, right off this episode. After Marge and Lisa start a charity together, Marge's head is turned by the money and prestige of big charity fundraising. My trivia for this one is that one of the bets on longshotgimmick.com is that Thanos from Marvel Comics appears. And my best moment was Homer's whole getting fired process. This one gets a 3 out of 5. This was barely a 3 because there isn't that much exciting here, but I feel a 2 would be a bit harsh. I mean, it was competent at telling the story. There was the basic conflict with Marge and Lisa, but there was nothing new explored there really, and the satire was very bland. The episode basically ended on a message that some charities are scams, and that rich business people would rather fill their own wallets than help the needy, which of course I largely agree with, but I think everyone already knows that. The problem is there's no easy solution to it. And this episode certainly never offered a solution to it, or even shared any new light on it really. I did at least like how Marge and Lisa made up in the end, and they never actually got too mean to each other, even when they were disagreeing. Despite this not being the funniest episode, there were still a few okay bits. The line from Kirk about stage 3 of the getting fired process was good, although I do wonder how Homer can keep paying for unused podcast equipment and sports betting when he's getting fired all the time. I did still like that intro scene though. I sometimes dabble in sports betting myself, and the episode is right. It can add interest to what otherwise can be boring sports or games. As long as you're not betting more than you can afford to lose, of course. That's kind of the golden rule of gambling. Season 34, Episode 20, The Very Hungry Caterpillars. When a plague of insects shuts down Springfield, everyone is forced to spend time in lockdown. My trivia for this one is that the Screamer Pillar from the season 13 episode The Frying Game makes a cameo here, and my best moment was the ending. This one gets a 3 out of 5 from me. I think this episode conceptually was solid, but I don't have too many thoughts on it really. Obviously there was some satire about the whole lockdown situation during the COVID pandemic, and I've touched on my opinions on that in the past, so I'm not going to get into them here. But I think it was a wise move that this episode had a completely different reason for lockdowns, in the form of a caterpillar invasion. That allowed it to dodge the whole COVID stuff, and instead allowed them to focus more on the little things, involving the anxiety people can feel, and the problems they face in a situation like this. I appreciate that this episode took a much more grounded and human approach, with, for example, Marge and Homer running short on baby food, or Bart desperately trying to find some entertainment by secretly filming Skinner, and the most impactful, Lisa struggling from anxiety, thinking that lockdown would go on forever and the world would end. I did like the ending message here. It tried to show how you should always try and look at the positives of a situation, and never let things out of your control make you lose your mind. At the same time though, it was also a bit pessimistic, suggesting that no lessons would be learned, and that people will act the same in the future, the next time something major happens. And if history is anything to go by, I sadly have to agree with that. But again, just because many others refuse to learn their lesson, doesn't mean you have to follow suit. This wasn't the best as far as comedy goes, but Bart and his friends' reaction to watching Skinner's home life were probably the best bits. Season 34, Episode 21, Clown v. the Board of Education. Krusty opens a school for clowning, which becomes very successful, with Bart being one of its top students. The school soon faces off against Springfield Elementary. My trivia for this one is that Krusty and Sideshow Mel perform a parody of Romeo and Juliet, and my best moment was Bart exposing Lisa as being a killjoy. I gave this one a 2 out of 5. There was nothing terrible about this one. It was just another Krusty getting involved with the mob episode, so I struggled to get excited about it. The thing I did somewhat enjoy about it was seeing Bart being able to enjoy his education and actually learn new things. Sure, it was in an unorthodox way, in the form of a clown school, but so what? I have argued before that playing into a kid's personality and talents is a far better way to teach them than trying to get them all to respond to the same thing, i.e. the traditional way of teaching. I originally thought it was going to turn into a Bart and Lisa rivalry, with the scene of Homer and Bart putting Lisa down and all, but that never really materialized, only with the brief contest between the two schools. Instead, things did pivot to Krusty and Fat Tony, and it was just kind of boring once it did. There just seemed to be too much going on in general, which meant that the episode never really ended up feeling committal or meaningful. The ending tried to have a nice moment between Bart and Krusty, but because of the aforementioned reasons, it never meant much. The comedy was slightly below average in my opinion, but I at least liked Bart calling Lisa out for being negative for the sake of it. As much as she likes to deny it, we all know that she tries to be the smartest person in the room. Season 34, Episode 22, Homer's Adventures Through the Windshield Glass. Time stands still after Homer crashes his car and flies through the windshield. As his life flashes before his eyes, a magical friend helps Homer learn a secret truth about his marriage. My trivia for this one is that the episode title is a reference to a previous Simpsons bit, the Troy McClure film, Alice's Adventures Through the Windshield Glass. And my best moment was the trains taking people between heaven and hell. So the season finale gets a 4 out of 5. This wasn't a perfect episode, but it was a good conclusion to the season overall, and just about deserving of a 4. I'm not sure that the revelation that Marge has always had access to this money coming in is particularly great. It doesn't fully line up with many of the old plot lines about the family struggling for money, but I guess that is just me nitpicking the continuity, which is a pointless thing to do at this stage. So I'll hold my hands up on that one. In general, I liked Homer's subconscious trip through his own attitude, his relationship with Marge, and even his opinions on Marge's father, Clancy. He has rarely ever been seen on the show, so to get a little extra backstory out of him is cool, even if he is in hell for a check scam. It was really a few standout moments which really made this episode, for me though. The couch gag, to celebrate the 750th episode, was lovely. It made me want to keep pausing to see if I could pick out each of the characters. And as I said, the joke in hell was not only funny, it was also interesting to think about. I mean, if something like hell really does exist, it would be rather silly to base it only on subjective human morality, right? Because, as this episode pointed out, our morality is always changing over time. So you would imagine that there's this constant shuffling back and forth between heaven and hell, based on who deserves to be there at any given point in time. Unless our behaviour is only judged on the context of our time, which also has its own problems if you want to get deep into it. But yeah, I don't really want to get too deep into the whole concept of heaven and hell here. In general, I try to keep open-minded about this stuff, about the true nature of reality, the universe, and that kind of thing. But I thought it was an interesting little scene regardless. Anyway, let's just get into the season recap. And here it is, the season 34 summary. This season very much matched the last in terms of quality, as the overall average score was a 3, and I'll go into more detail about that in a minute. But before that, my bottom 5 episodes were Hostile Kirk Place at 5, The King of Night at 4, The Many Saints of Springfield at 3, One Angry Lisa at 2, and When Nelson Met Lisa at 1. My top 5 were Fan-ily Feud at 5, Step Brother from the Same Planet at 4, Not It at 3, Bartless at 2, and as the only 5 out of 5, Treehouse of Horror 33 was the best of the season. So, as the rating shows, this season continues the progression in a standard of the show back to where it was during the middle seasons. I'm not sure I want to call this a full resurgence of the show, as these seasons are still only average, but it is no doubt much more enjoyable than it has been for a while. Let's just hope that the show continues the improvement for as long as it stays on the air. I will have to wait a full year for season 35 to find out though. As far as what went on in this season, it was much more experimental overall. There were not so many run-of-the-mill tired plot lines. They at least tried to have a point to every episode, whether it be some satire or completely format changing non-canon episodes, like Not It and Lisa the Boy Scout. I just think that after 34 seasons of knowing these characters, the show does run into trouble sometimes trying to add complex backstories to each of them, and still have it be authentic and believable. Nowadays, whether it be Coral or the Sea Captain, all of them seem to be getting these exciting origin stories. Now, as I said, a lot of the time I find that they do add something to the character, and I often enjoy the individual episode. But on the other hand, it does kind of make Springfield a more exciting world, a more exciting place than it was designed to be. In real life, a lot of people are just boring and don't have these wacky life experiences, and The Simpsons was originally meant to be a satire on real life. So for certain characters, I almost don't want to learn more about them, because they might lose some of their mystery and grittiness if I did. Again, this is not a major complaint, as overall I do like the show trying new things. It is very much needed after 34 seasons on the air. I am just pointing out some of the inevitable problems that come up after a show has been around for so long. As I said though, this season was very enjoyable overall, with enough 4 and above rated episodes for me to be able to recommend. I don't have much to report as far as the characters go, but I would say that Bart was the best he has been for a while here. Whether it be him actually finding a way to enjoy learning, or having a whole episode dedicated to how valuable he is to the family. There seemed to be a concerted effort to paint him in a good light here, and I very much enjoyed that, given that I have been critical of his characterization previously in the HD era. It was a nice change here for sure. Before I sign off, I want to once again thank you guys for sticking with this series. I hope you all stick around for the recap video to this whole thing, which will be dropping in the next few weeks. And even though it will be another year until the next one of these, I will be starting a new review series on Family Guy, so if you are a fan of that show, I would appreciate it if you also give that series a chance. And I'm not completely abandoning the Simpsons fans, as at some point in the future, I do want to add a worst episode list and a best new episode list for the show. No promises on when, but keep an eye out and I will put them out as a surprise at some point in the future. That's all for now though folks. Please be kind enough to drop me a like and a sub, and I'll see you next time. Take care.